Hello, everybody. Welcome to another webinar with Receivables Info. I'm your host and moderator today, Adam Parks, and I'm joined with Chris coming from Latitude by Genesys. How you doing today, Chris?
Doing good. I was like digging that slow jam music. That was really good. I like that.
We're trying to update a little bit as we prepare for 2025. We can thank Catalina for the idea to start running video at the beginning so that we're not all just awkwardly staring at each other while everybody's joining the meeting.
It was good. I was
So
moving back
really
and forth.
do
I didn't
appreciate
have a camera on.
Well, I really do appreciate everybody joining us today. I think we've got a really interesting topic and kind of a cool announcement to make today as well. And so in working with Chris and the Latitude team for the past couple of years from a marketing perspective, one of the things that we really wanted to start talking about more in 2025 is artificial intelligence and its effect on the debt collection industry. And I thought that Chris and the Latitude team were a perfect way for us to create that content because they find themselves being the AI hub, meaning they sit at the center of a lot of the things that organizations are trying to do. And rather than selling AI services, they're enabling the interconnection across whatever type of technology you want to use or whatever vendor you find to be the best fit for your particular services. So I thought it was an interesting way to kick it off. And as we go, we're going to start talking a little bit. You're going to hear us referencing the AI Hub, and I've got my handy water bottle to go with it. But we're going to be releasing a podcast in 2025 that is going to talk all about AI. We'll be releasing a monthly episode and cannot thank Chris and the Latitude by Genesys team enough for enabling us to actually create this content because we can't do it without great organizations supporting us. So Chris, anything, what made you excited about the discussions regarding artificial intelligence?
Well, I think you and I have talked a bunch of times about this, but I've also started having conversations with other folks, other technology providers, people who are early stage AI startups. And I have spent the last year trying to use my spare time to learn a little bit more about AI, figure out what our strategy at Latitude is about AI, learn more about the Genesys strategy of AI. And I had a lot of anxiety around it. I felt like I was behind. I wasn't moving fast enough. I was just missing out on this sort of, fast moving freight train. And as over the last several months, just sort of been learning, I realized I started to calm down a little bit and realized that, we, especially technology companies, that are heavily influenced by Silicon Valley and all the other areas, there's that sort of level of speed in AI development, but it's our job on this podcast and at Latitude to sort of sort through the chaff and try to bring the best of breed to our customers and our partners and to our prospects. So I started feeling a little calmer, and then when we talked about the idea for the podcast, I thought this makes sense. I wanted this to be sort of a no hype zone, an ability for everybody to sort of get knowledge, learn more in a low stress environment, non-judgmental environment type of thing, and figure out where it is. Because I don't think any of us are too late or behind the curve here. I think now is the time for us to start thinking about it, contemplating it, planning for it. And now is the time but we're not behind. I want to stress to everybody, we're not behind yet.
I don't think so either. I think you're right on point, Chris. And through the conversations that I've had with organizations around the space, IT professionals, operations folks, I think everybody's kind of on their own AI journey right now. And I'm not sure that everybody really knows what that means from an AI perspective. Like, what is the journey for me and how am I actually going to use it? But where I feel like we've fallen short as an industry, and the reason that I pushed so hard to start this new podcast was around the idea that I don't just want to hear about these things from organizations that are selling it. I don't need another veiled sales pitch. And that's why when we started having this conversation, I said, this is the perfect opportunity to create this content without it being the sales of a particular product. Because what I really want to talk about here is the use cases. How are we actually using artificial intelligence? How do we empower that journey? What privacy concerns do we have? How are we getting our policies and procedures in line? Like, that's the kind of stuff that I really want to talk about, is empowering individuals and organizations to take that next step and actually start leveraging artificial intelligence. And I've been going through that journey internally as well. Now that I'm a news organization and I'm not spending as much time in the specific data, but we did conduct the TransUnion debt collection industry report for 2024. And so I conducted the survey and had the opportunity to write the white paper of the report. And through that process, I really got a much better understanding of how organizations are using artificial intelligence, how they feel about their investment into AI as individual organizations and people, how that changes based on the discipline in which that organization lives in. And by that, I mean the disciplines of debt collection, right? I'm an agency, I'm a law firm, I'm a debt buyer, I'm a service provider, I'm a data provider. And there's all of those things to consider as we start going down our AI path. And so I'm excited to start talking about some of these things in a new way and really try to address these. So for those of you that were able to join us today, really am excited. As you have questions throughout this presentation and throughout this discussion, let's make it a discussion. We've got a deck. We're prepared to walk through the 6 use cases and how we feel about them and all of that. But the more that we can enable discussion in the process, the better off I think we're all going to be, and the more value we're all going to get from this hour. So with all of that being said, Chris, and for anybody who has not had the opportunity to get to know you through the years, could you give us a quick background on yourself and your organization?
Yes, I joined Latitude by Genesys 6 years ago. It's been an incredible ride. I'm a senior director of business operations. I'm teamed at the hip with a guy named Ian Winderth, who I think a lot of people know, who's on the product side and engineering side of things. And we run Latitude by Genesys within the larger Genesys organization, which has been a great partnership, and we're thrilled and things are going well. We're having a great year. It's been fun.
Awesome. So I think as we kind of jump into this conversation here, let's talk a little bit about why the AI Hub and like what it is that our objective is. We kind of talked about this high level in our introduction, but I think it's beneficial for us to have a discussion about it here, because to me, it's all about the connection point. And that's why I thought AI Hub was such a great name for what we're doing here, because it's putting us in a great position to talk about all of the different ways and parts and pieces in which these things start to come together, versus talking about just one of these use cases or how I can use artificial intelligence to solve this problem. But I think it's important for us to take a step back and look at what it is that we're trying to accomplish as an industry and how these things start to come together. As I've listened to content and creative content around artificial intelligence in the space, I feel like we're just mislabeling it a lot. And for those of you that have not read it, I would say, if you're just starting your own personal AI journey and you can find a copy of the Clara Dearden book, this was given out at DCS a couple of years ago, highly suggest it, is providing you with a baseline for kind of artificial intelligence and those data sets and some of those higher level financial services concerns as it relates to artificial intelligence. But I've had some really strange conversations this year about organizations that are quote unquote using artificial intelligence in their organization to pick up and drop off files off an FTP. And I'm going to use that as an example because it was a very specific discussion, but trying to explain to that same group of people that, like, hey, I appreciate what you're saying here, that you're leveraging some not you task time to accomplish this objective, but that doesn't make it artificial intelligence, right? That might be what we call RPA, or robotic process automation, something more if and statements, and we'll kind of talk about that in a few minutes here. But I think that there's too much mislabeling of what artificial intelligence is. And I would say one of the first things that I always suggest to people when they're like, oh, I'm not really sure what AI is, it comes down to like, what is not only like what is artificial intelligence, but how is that model learning? Where is the data set that's feeding that model? Because if there isn't a large data set that's feeding the model, you're probably not dealing with right artificial intelligence. You're probably dealing with something a little bit lesser. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the data is critical. It feeds the large language models. Those large language models make AI work. And so having the right data is critical. As a system of record, Latitude is, in a great position to be the hub for storing your data and then using it on whatever AI tool that you want to leverage. But that's also, that's your own internal data. There's external data that you use that also trains the models, and that blending, if you will, and I don't mean mingling of data, but just the blending of the operational aspects of of whatever AI engine you intend to use, and how they work together, and how they help you help make predictive and then eventually generative decisions is really critical. But that data that you have housed in Latitude or whatever your system of record happens to be is, it's proprietary for you. It's your special sauce. You must protect it at all costs. And so those are things that you need to worry about, and we have in these important discussions. But eventually, we're going to have to solve for that and get you to a point where you feel comfortable using it, your organization feels comfortable, and your customers feel comfortable allowing that to happen, and on a third-party basis or first-party too, of course.
Well, you should bring up some really good points there, and that's why I've got lined up for 2025 some really important discussions as it relates to artificial intelligence. And I think when we talk about AI from a privacy perspective, for example, there's some great discussions for us to have about how are the models being trained, and what does that disclosure look like, right? We do have FDCPA concerns, and although Hunstein is, kind of not an issue of the day, I think it's something that we need to keep in the back of our minds as we go through the process of trying to understand what this privacy is going to look like in a uncharted territory, so to speak, right?
And I look at this slide and everybody gets, I feel like there's everybody watching is this sort of like, oh God, I don't even want to go down this road. And so they sort of back off. I think if we can sort of, we're at the very beginning. This is the first podcast. We're going to have more. We're going to have these as topics down the road. So don't stress out about this. These are solutions that are solvable.
Correct. And this is a list of discussions that we're going to have in 2025, talking about privacy. I think that there's some really interesting ethical concerns. And I spoke with somebody outside the industry that's very plugged into AI that I think could be great for that ethical discussion, because they did work in our industry 20 years ago. And so they've got a pretty good understanding of us. And then even looking at those use cases that we're going to talk about today, how it affects the AI ecosystem. And then this is where I really start to think we're going to find some actionable items for our audience, is in the criteria for selecting AI vendors. So like, what criteria, and we talk about this a lot when we talk about systems of record, and we've done this for Latitude in the past, talking about those kinds of things. But it's not just select me, it's what is the criteria by which to make that selection. And I think having a discussion around what I should be looking for will help me better evaluate what tools and services I might want to use in the future for this purpose.
I agree. I'm hoping that this podcast becomes not. I'm using the term again, hub, but unlike
I chose it well. Huh?
Yeah, over the last 20 years, we have integrated and our customers have integrated multiple vendors that are providing value in certain areas, but that happens in relation to AI very slowly over the decades. Now it's like hyperspeed here, and then you sort of look at this and everybody's gonna like get vapor lock on it. And so instead of us sort of we're going to have a lot of great panelists. We're going to have some really smart people on this podcast in the future who are going to be able to talk about these cool things. But I think what we really also need to do is stress more conversation. Of the 25 people who are watching this live, we just really need to be working with each other and to help us accelerate. Things are moving so fast now. So we just have to be, we need to be buddies, not worry about, I don't think the market at this point is going to be able to dictate, you got to have this AI vendor or this AI vendor. We got to work together. So I want to hear from people like, hey, we tested this. This is good. You guys should think about using this. Oh, and then I can tell some other people and then share our learning here. I think that's
going to be the second half of that podcast. Once we've established some of those discussions, we'll start interviewing and having talks with specific services and being able to dig a little bit deeper into those areas. For today's discussion, though, I thought it'd be important for us to start and talk a little bit about what that evolution looked like. And then I promise everybody here that the next slide is going to be the 6 use cases that we can all debate as a group and talk about whether or not you feel like I've missed one. Now, I've taken every AI company that I'm aware of in the space and many outside of the space, and I've been able to say from a debt collection standpoint, how would I apply that technology, right? And I've only come up with 6. So if there's somebody watching this, or if you feel like you've got a vendor that would be the 7th use case, I'm interested to hear it, but I am going to argue back because I have not been able to come up with a really good 7th one. But in talking about the evolution of the AI in debt collection, for me, this all started with the if and then statements, right? Everything kind of started back with that. And I believe that's a lot of the process, the robotic process automation, or the RPA. If this is true, then do this. If that is true, then do that, right? And these are very binary style statements. There's not a lot of intelligence behind it, but it's a binary statement that allows me to push something through a workflow. And I think a lot of debt collection workflows historically have been built on this if and then statement styling of methodology, right? It's a Boolean methodology for moving things down a multi-tiered path. Does that make sense?
It totally does. I mean, we have a product called Workflow as part of Latitude, which is, a WYSIWYG editor that does exactly this. But my early part of my career, I used to build automated voice scripts for a company called Soundbite Communication, which was exactly this. If the customer does this, do this. If the customer says that, do that. And press this button, do this type of things. And those still work. They're still good. But it's not AI.
Agreed, right? But I would call it it's the ancestor of, right? We have to start somewhere with some kind of logic to enable something to drive our thought process forward. So I think that was a good place for us to begin. But then I think we need to start talking about the definition of what is artificial intelligence, right? And so I hear a lot of people kind of using AI and machine learning as kind of 2 different worlds, but machine learning is actually a part of artificial intelligence on the whole, right? And so I think from this isn't going to be I'm not reading a technical definition. I'm going to try and take a shot from the gut to define how AI exists within our world as debt collectors. But basically, this is going to be, for me, it's the ability to drive processes forward using an existing data set to understand and predict future action. And so by looking at all of my historical calls and listening to all of that text, I can start to drive patterns and trends that when this happens, I can now change the next action, right, in order to drive it towards my end goal. And so I think it becomes this kind of chain of reactions. But if that chain of reactions is not originating from a large data set, you're not talking about artificial intelligence. And I'm talking a large data set, not our calls this week, right? Like there's not enough data. I don't care how big your call center is in a week in order to do that. But I know a lot of people are holding 7-10 years of potential call recordings, but 4 years. It depends on your organization and jurisdictions. But I think that's one of those things that we really need to look at is how large is the sample size that we're putting into it. And I can tell you, even in the early 1990s, there was a debt buying group that had an individual account net present value model because they knew should these criteria be true, the result is most likely to be this within, let's call it a 3% standard deviation on the average. That's really interesting to me to see that you can start to hone it in.
Mm-hmm.
20 years. I mean, we're talking late 1990s with that
Yep.
kind of capability. It wasn't artificial intelligence. It was if and then statements being driven by an access database. But I think that's the direction that we're starting to go in is understanding the size of these models, right? It's not even a data warehouse anymore. It's a data lake if you're talking about artificial intelligence, because it needs to be so much larger than a warehouse, right? Like a warehouse
Yeah.
is kind of confining when you think about it in that construct.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably look at this and they go, I see a company that's claiming to be selling artificial intelligence. It's part of their marketing, AI, and nobody's sort of immune to that. We all kind of tag along a little bit there, but it's not any different than the predictive things that we used to do. We, use Latitude, you ship off data in the middle of the night, it gets processed and gets sent back in the morning, and you use it to make decisions that day. I think what I've learned is I've been on my little sort of overall learning about AI journey is one of the content creators that I watch a lot basically said, well, she goes, we're really still in the predictive phase of AI. But what you're seeing today is it's all about speed and capacity of compute. So we're applying massive amounts of compute at this problem. So it's really no different by shipping your data, shipping your results over to somebody and getting the results to FTP back to you in the morning, but it's happening like that. The compute power is what's driving this super fast predictive these super fast predictive AI results, and is taking things like agent assist and making it instead of an if-then statement, but folding in large language models to help feed that type of thing. So we're in this era of what's driving it today is compute, and that's where a lot of the investment and the money is being spent is powering the next generation of generative AI, where we're taking the compute and then applying it to something new and interesting.
I was talking to somebody from the Amazon AI team who kind of clued me in on what they're really selling. They don't care about selling you artificial intelligence. They sell you compute power and data storage, right? Like those are the two products that Amazon Web Services ultimately is selling. The artificial intelligence is a window dressing, and it reminds me of, Mad Men in the 1960s. And for anybody that's watched that show, right? Like the creative, like the interesting part of all of that is the window dressing. They were really selling ad placements. Right? Everything about that business was selling ad placements. This was just the window dressing. And I think as you look at the push for artificial intelligence that comes from Google, that comes from Amazon, that comes from Microsoft, I think is being driven through that profitability in that computing power. So just something to concern yourself with as you're going through that process. I mean, I'm sitting next to a $20,000 home PC here specifically to be able to run the Llama large language models, right? Independent of having to train that through the web or release any data into the outside of my environment. That's a pretty significant investment to try and attack that out of a kind of a home computing system. But to me, I think the safety level that we live in as debt collectors right now is in the predictive phase, right? I don't know that I think that there's some organizations out there that have some generative tool sets and are at the beginning of growing that. I've been on some of these, some of these voice calls and other things, and it's impressive, right? Like I've seen some really great technology, but I think as debt collectors, we kind of live in the predictive state right now. I don't know that we've got enough guardrails in place or enough clarity from a legal standpoint for us to feel comfortable just letting that generative AI, run free and say what it wants to say. I don't know that we've got that level of trust. I think we've got AI hallucinations. I think we've got other risks associated with that kind of
I agree 100%. Generative AI is I think we're on, I feel we're on the cusp. I watch some people in Silicon Valley always feel like we might be in that the curve.
They might be though, Chris.
What?
But I think for us, like Silicon Valley does not fall under the same regulation.
No.
Although I did read something yesterday that the CFPB is trying to bring Google under their purview because somehow, way, shape, or form, they believe that to not be overreach. I thought that was interesting. Separate statement, but they're not, like the technology companies don't fall under our level of financial services regulation. And CFPB has made it very clear what their expectations are as it relates to any kind of AI model. You have to be able to unravel it and demonstrate the math, so to speak, right? It's not just input, output, and measurement. They want to see the math in the center. And I think that's going to create new challenges. But I think that's why we live in that predictive set. I think that some of this technology, if I was an airline booking, or that's probably not a good one either. They're pretty heavily regulated themselves. But if I was selling widgets, right? If I was selling pens, I would feel differently about having a conversational AI bot answer the phone and process an order than I would having them connect with something so highly regulated.
Yeah, I agree with that. And is it just Google they're going after, or are they going after Amazon?
I only saw Google on that particular, like that article that I saw yesterday was specific to it. I will have to find that, and I'm sure I'll be sharing that on.
You'll have that on the
newsletter
next day
or so,
right? Yeah, the newsletter for Friday.
I always like to keep my eye out on, on these overreaches because I feel like they've done a lot of that lately. And so I think AI is just another area in which we run some risk of them feeling like we've kind of gone over the edge for them. But as we've been talking, all this AI conversation, Chris, I think we got to get to the AI use cases here and start talking our way through it. So I want to kind of run through these use cases and then we can dig into each one of them in a little bit of a deeper fashion. But I think this is a great way for us to break it down. And so for anybody who is watching right now that wants to, drop a comment, if you see something that I'm missing here, drop it in the chat. I'm interested to hear your perspective, but I really feel like I can take each piece of technology that I've explored in the space and I can fit it into one of these 6 quite easily. So let's talk about this kind of from the top here. And so for me, it starts with, Chris, and I think you would agree with this one, is the scoring and treatment, right? It's about driving those workflows and an understanding of predictability. So we're leveraging as much data as we can to understand and predict the behaviors of consumers, and that could be based on previous behaviors, right? Like looking at this individual consumer's behaviors, or it could be looking at that consumer in a classified way, right? Like categorizing and classifying those consumers to try and predict based on seeing these behaviors previously, we can predict these will be the next behaviors that we might see. And then using that new knowledge to drive the work treatment of these accounts. Should we be litigating? Should we be texting, emailing, right? Like what communication methodology is going to be most likely used by this consumer? Is it based on age bracket? Is it, what is it based on? Now, it shouldn't be based on age or demographic areas. Although I think there is some, legitimacy to the differences in behaviors based on generations, but that's another story for another time. Driving that scoring and treatment. Now, I find it interesting here too that the first times that I really started hearing about artificial intelligence as it applied to the debt collection industry was all related to scoring. It was organizations, and there was a Toonly and a couple of others that were ultimately scoring these accounts based on this large language model, and then using that to drive other workflows. And that could be the selection of which accounts we should be litigating on. It could be selecting communication channels. It could be selecting agencies or law firms based on a variety of factors. But for me, that's that first big push.
Yeah, I'll say something which may be provocative, but I'm not sure that any, at least the ones that I've been exposed to, I'm not seeing radical improvement over past results in this particular category. Maybe faster, maybe, but I don't know if speed is the killer on this one. Does it need to, the scoring and treatment need to be as fast as AI can provide it to provide value? And at the end of the day, is this that easier to collect now that I have this information at this moment? So I don't know what you've seen.
For me, it's about predictability, right? And so I haven't seen any kind of a massive increase in the accounts any portfolios I was managing that because
Yeah.
I applied some AI scoring methodology. But I do think that the larger the data set sample becomes, the
Mhm.
more likely we are to find trends that add value long term. And so I
Yeah.
do think that we're still, I think, somewhat on the early end of this, because I don't know that we were all tracking and storing our information in a
No.
structured format. And you're
No.
always going to hear me talk about structured and unstructured data sets, right?
No.
So from a scoring standpoint, I think there are some structured things that we could run, but that's not all that different from what we've always done with
No.
those same data points and if and then statements.
Yeah, I think that what I would be looking for here is this provider doing it faster and cheaper? Is it helping me? I'm gonna have the same results that I used to get from my scoring and treatment, but it's coming in faster and it's coming in cheaper. That to me, that's maybe I might be missing something here, but
I think you're
that's what.
somewhat on point, but it's also a function of, like, can we actually, as the data sets have become structured and they've become larger and larger and larger, can we actually find more predictive attributes that allow us to understand or predict what's going to
Yeah,
happen? Because, like I said, we're not really at that generative state of
yeah,
artificial intelligence within this industry. I would say, on the whole, generally speaking, I'm sure there's outliers, but I'm
mhm,
talking about the rule, not the outliers.
yep,
And then, and to Casey had just dropped a question or a comment in the chat here about what about distressed asset recovery law firms. Well, I think that comes into, from a scoring perspective, yes, that could be done. The scoring and treatment could be used to drive the selection of which recovery vendor I'm going to use on a particular account. But I think even more so is the data sourcing and appending is where I think the law firms are spending a little bit more of their time as it relates to artificial intelligence. And that's from a, can I find an asset and how can I append that to the account information? Right. So I do see artificial intelligence opportunity here, not scoring, but operational pain points. I'm not sure that I understand the operational pain points question. I would need a little
is
bit
that,
more
does
detail.
she need? I'm sorry, it could be she or he. Is that helping your law firm just on a day-to-day basis
Oh,
do
reading
more with less
documentation.
people? Yeah, got it. Okay, yeah, reading docs. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so that's,
yeah,
to me, that would either fall under scoring and treatment, right? Being able to read that documentation of, like, here's my media accounts and how I need to drive it, because I could be driving some treatment with that. The other thing that I would look at here would be the quality and compliance. I don't know
okay.
that you're ever going to eliminate paralegals, but I think that you can find
Yep.
some balance to that. And to me, I think early on stages of that is a combination of both BPO service and artificial intelligence potentially simultaneously. I'm not aware of a 1000% accurate tool set for, like, redacting documents for court, as an example. So I know there's a combination of, right, manual process and then, or using an automated process, but you are still going to have some manual resources in order to manage the exceptions, because I don't think
I
anybody's at 100%.
I have a anecdotal story around the law
Sure.
within Genesys, not specifically within the Latitude team, but Genesys did a 1-year experiment using in the legal department at Genesys, trying out things like that. We're eliminating paralegals or using AI to do what paralegals used to do for the staff attorneys, and they were super gung ho about it and said the results were fantastic. And it, just get more. Each attorney can get more done. There's more ability to move through that. Not specifically collections oriented at all, but just our law firm, our law team, I should say, got a lot of value out of it.
And I think that there's value to those tool sets. All I'm saying is that I think when you go through the automated port, like having looked at quite literally millions of account documents over time, it's real hard to say that there's no, like, standard to it. right?
Yeah.
Like, and even if I buy from the same bank for 10 years, like those statements are going to have some changes and twists over time. That's going to require me to modify the model's understanding of the documents that it's looking at, because it's a combination of OCR, or optical character recognition, tied back to an understanding of what it actually saw. And so some of those documents are going to come across in what we'll call, there's two different kinds of PDFs in the world. There's the PDF that's like readable and touchable, and you can highlight the text. And there's the other PDFs, which are ultimately just displaying an image. Now, this all comes back to Adobe and the portable digital file and how they basically opened that out to an open source platform. But I don't want to go that far down the nerd rabbit hole today. But anybody who ever wants to talk about the origins of the PDF and all of that, I was Adobe beta tester, like number 32 for Creative Cloud. So I've been tied into that world now for over 20 years from a creation standpoint. But I do think that there's some interesting ways for us to do that. You just have to have some manual power to manage those exceptions. You're never going to hit 100%.
Yeah. Great.
Now, the chat and written communications, I think, is also another opportunity for the industry. And I think, from a chat perspective, the AI chatbot, I would say, is probably the most common phrase of 2024 that I heard at a conference. Haven't seen one yet that was as accurate as would make me comfortable to release into the wild. But I continually hear about great tools in the market.
This is the chat and extending chat into the voice communication. So these next two is actually the one application at this juncture in the life of AI that is actually making money. Genesys is selling these types of capabilities, either homegrown or through a App Foundry partner. And people are spending money on it. People are liking the results, and it is driving value for our customers. So when a naysayer comes up to me and says, "Hey, nobody's making any money," well, yes, there was a lot of hype, but now that is actually making money. So is it improving things? We're seeing a great deal of adoption. And by the way, a lot of the vendors that Latitude is evaluating to bring on as part of the hub are in this area right now. So there is value in this area. Now, is it generative yet? No, it's not generative yet. But it's taking things that it's leveraging compute power to be able to respond very rapidly and in a good quality way, and that's meeting legal and ethical and all those requirements that you have in this area. So is it generative? No, it is, but it's fast and good, sounds good. It's effective.
The voice communication is probably where I see the lowest adoption to this point from an AI standpoint across I'm going to say the debt collection industry specifically, and I'm going to try and remember these stats, but this will get published in the TransUnion debt collection industry report. But basically, I want to say conversational AI was the lowest adoption rate. And mostly because of the fear of the guardrails around the voice communication. People seem to be more comfortable with the written communications, but I think there's still a fear of AI hallucination from a voice perspective. Now, an organization like Genesys is going to have that honed in a little bit tighter, and especially as you start breaking out outside of the highly regulated industries and you start looking at if it's customer service and those kinds of things, I think that the capability is exponentially expanded upon, right? Yes. Because the risk levels are significantly lower.
But
I do think that it's still one of those things where you need someone to manage the exceptions.
Right. Yeah. So I'll caveat my previous statements is they're not collecting debt using the Genesys chatbots right now. That's not happening right now. Will it one day? Yes, absolutely.
I think it's not that far off. I think that's the future of where we're going. But as we live in the predictive world, I think it's not until we start really breaking that cusp into the generative world. And I think you made an accurate statement that we're like right in between those two, right? Like we're on that line between the predictive and the generative, and what's that going to look like? And maybe by the time this even makes it to YouTube later this week, that will change. I mean, it is happening at it's funny. I was watching Spaceballs the other day as I've been giving my wife a tour of like my favorite childhood movies. And when I think about artificial intelligence in this space, it feels like 2024 is when we went into ludicrous speed,
Yes.
right? Like ludicrous speed, go. 2024 was all about artificial intelligence and the AI discussion. But I think we were all so just excited to be talking about something new that we didn't really put down and say, like, what are the specific use cases in which I can find value in my organization? Which
Yeah.
leads me, because now that we're down to 15 minutes, Chris, I could talk to you about AI all day long. Unfortunately, we have a whole new podcast to accomplish that. But two other use cases I want to make sure that we get through here is the quality and compliance. And so from this perspective, you've got the Cedric AIs, you've got a whole bunch of different technology organizations out there, Prodigal, that are listening to the calls, identifying the problems and kicking over the exceptions for manual review. And that is, I think, is one of the best uses of artificial intelligence that I've seen in the debt collection space. It's not a revenue producer, right? This is more of a risk mitigation situation, or it could even be used from a call and coaching standpoint. And I know I've seen some of that type of technology from a Zenerate and other organizations like that. But when I start looking at the quality here, we go back to 2020, organizations were lucky to be listening to 10% of the calls that were being made on their accounts, if that. And I mean, realistically, it was 10 calls a week, not 10%, right? And so the sample size was very, very small. It was being selected at random. And then we had the application of artificial intelligence. And through the application of AI into that particular use case, now we're able to listen to 100% of the calls. And the 10 calls that the live people, or the whatever number of calls the live people are listening to, are only those that the AI has already identified there's a potential problem. Because I don't think that its predictability is at 100% yet either, right? It still requires, it's identifying anomalies and putting those anomalies into a bucket for a live person to go and look at. But I think that's a very realistic approach to the use of artificial intelligence in such a highly regulated space.
Yeah, that's driving efficiency, right? And that's a big part of what these tools should be doing. Is you should be offloading a lot of this boring work or rote work to an engine like this, bringing you back a set. Now, when you're doing your scoring, when you're reviewing these things, and that's something we always have to do. We have to review what machines are doing for us. But as we review, and if you're going over through 10% of those calls, and you're finding that the AI is providing you things that absolutely do need to be reviewed, and not a lot of extra, then that's fantastic. That's the goal, right? Is that it is picking up and delivering to you. So tuning it so that it's, you don't feel like you're missing out on calls that need to be reviewed, and you're not being fed too many calls that don't require review. That I'd like to hear somebody is using it right now and seeing, like, how do you manage that aspect? That's pretty interesting to me right now, because I do have people asking those questions. Like, how do I know? I right now I can't tell you. We know that these tools exist. They're good. They're reasonably priced. You should try them. I want to know how it's working for you.
I think a lot of it comes down to that exception management, right? And then we talk about kind of the last use case here being the negotiation and actually using this within, let's call it a virtual agent or an online agent or a consumer portal, however you want to phrase it, right? And right now, I think there's a lot of tools that have the if and then statements, but the question is, like, how do we get to the point of actually leveraging this from a negotiation standpoint to where it can take an input and respond and kind of enable that back and forth. Now, we all know that over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to see a significant increase in the volume of accounts. I think that's clear based on the economic indicators. We're also going to see most likely a drop in liquidation similar to what we've seen in the past when account volumes rise. At the same time, collection agencies and law firms are being faced with fee compression. Right? They're having to do more with less, as they always do, but now at a higher pace. So as we look at that, we can either hire more people that we're all having trouble doing, right? We can use a BPO service to expand our geographic footprint from our labor pool and expand that, or we can move into self-service technology, right? And so those first two require live people, and the last one is an investment into technology that carries forward. So I think we have seen over the last 18 months. And I expect that we will see exponentially more over the next 18 months, organizations specifically investing in this type of self-service technology that enables them to do more with less from a consumer standpoint. And the consumers, especially as they're getting younger, don't want to be on the phone. Now, we're never going to do away with payments by mail and payments over the phone with an assisted agent. Those things are going to continue to happen for another probably 30 to 40 years. But the younger consumer, I mean, I avoid being on the phone at all costs, right? Like, how often do you answer your phone if you don't know exactly who's calling you? And so I think this self-service type of technology, right? Do you call the bank or do you go on your banking app? I think we're going to see a lot more of that over the next 18 months as we have this massive increase of expected account volume. Because I don't know how else we're going to manage it, because we can't hire people fast enough, and there's only so many BPO seats.
No, I mean, there have to. This is sort of the eventual nirvana here is where you're really getting amazing value out of your AI investment to drive down costs and to maintain the level of quality that your top 10% of agents are providing today, and you need to replicate them. And we used to try to replicate them by training, right? Mm-hmm. And then writing their knowledge into if-then statements, right? This is, I used to have a slide that I used to use quite a bit when we talked about peak agent. Like, we reached peak agent a couple of years ago, right? We'll never have the ratio of live human beings. And this is the underbelly of AI, is that a good AI agent is going to shave off all those marginal, submarginal, and just okay agents that you might have had across all disciplines, not just collection. And then it's not going to take up all the agents. You're always going to need high quality human beings to handle the tough stuff, but just taking care of all that other thing. So if you're expecting volumes to increase, I think we all are, account volumes to increase, then this last one is where the true value comes in. I think the ability to collect more with less. That's as simple as it gets.
Well, and provided as a self-service option, because 88% of companies are having trouble hiring in the debt collection space. 81% are having trouble retaining the people that they've hired. So we can move ourselves into the BPO services, and that has exploded over the past couple of years, right? Like it just has. Like, there's been a large increase in the use of
self-service portals. I mean, that's pretty low tech when you think of it. But everybody wants one. Everyone wants to use one.
Everybody needs one now.
Yeah, everyone needs one. So the ability to have an AI just to really effectively negotiate and use all the data that is coming through the other channels is terrific and fascinating. And that's where I get super excited. This last one.
It's the opportunity to optimize our businesses. And so if we can optimize, like, yes, there are some simple negotiation tools out there now, and I'm sure that there's some that are already starting to play with and implement the artificial intelligence, but they're going to have to look at a lot of traffic and flowing that traffic through to understand it. I know there's at least one guy, on watching here right now, Mark Reinhard with Concepts to Code, that is always looking at those negotiation type tool sets and how do you communicate with that consumer? Because one of the things that kind of came to my attention recently, Chris, as I was writing the report, was that, like, we're in this position now where we send out a lot of text messages and emails, and there's been this rush to send out more texts, more emails, right? Like, to leverage these new communication methodologies and connect with consumers where they want to connect with us. That's great. Where does all that traffic go? It goes to the self-service portal. Because you're not trying to send them a text message or an email and drive them to a phone
to
call.
A person.
You're trying to drive them to a self-service solution.
Yes.
And I think that is a major, I think it's just something that we don't consider in this race to get to text messaging. The race to get to effective emails is now what?
Yeah, I mean, back in my voice days and my text days, it was always get to a live agent, get to a live agent, get to a live agent at all costs. That was it. And managing the the
Flow.
service levels of each agent without killing them during the day. So yeah, that constraint goes away, right? If you can drive through
So
here.
Chris, we literally have a slide for each one of these use cases, but only 7 minutes. So I'm feeling like the best use is probably to do a second session for us to walk through these individual use cases, because I don't think that we have enough time to cover it today. But what I do want to do is kind of jump ahead here to getting started with your AI journey, which I think is a good place for us to kind of end our discussion today with our final 5 minutes. And that's like, for me, my AI journey began really like effectively using it with Gemini and using it in my Google Meets to outline the discussions. And whether it be internal or external, sometimes I find myself with a really long sales cycle, as an example. Or like you and I have had 12 different discussions about the AI hub, right? And so by being able to go back to the notes throughout those has really had a positive effect for me to be able to leverage the discussions that we've already had without having to repeat those, right? Because if there's a 6-month gap between two discussions, I'm not going to remember all of it, but having those notes has been effective for me. I've talked with other individuals, and I did a podcast with John Noakes from National Credit Adjusters, where we talked about the beginning of his AI journey and where they started trying to leverage Copilot within their existing Microsoft environment to try and accomplish some things, whether that be interpreting. I think he tried using it to interpret a policy and then write a policy. Right. And so I think that there's some tools sets within there that you can do it as well. And I did another podcast with Sarah Wagerman talking about those first individual steps that you can take to setting the guardrails around artificial intelligence before you just let it loose into your organization. I know internally we started kind of baby steps, right? Like I started with Gemini personally, only on my account. And then we opened it up to the next person and the next person as we started to look at it. One of the things that I really liked as we talk about our ability to train the models was I actually trained my model on my own content. Like our team has written thousands of articles and social posts and all of that. And now when I ask it questions, it's actually referencing and referring to documentation that our team has created, which I like being able to kind of control what's being fed into that model so that I can have a better understanding of what's coming to the outside.
Yeah, one thing as I started my AI journey this year is I'm give you a couple of recommendations out there. Is, block out an hour or two a week if you can to play around with some of these tools and see how it can help you in your daily business. These are leaders within all these organizations, and maybe it's to help ideate on some blogs you want to write, or retune some of your collateral that you were working on, or simply turning on the AI assistant when you're doing a Zoom meeting, so it'll send you these great boil down notes of that. So start experimenting a little bit in your personal life and your professional life to just get it going a little bit, and then start to think, okay, now how can I apply it to my business that way? I think it can be daunting. It can be scary. You're not sure if you don't need to plunk out a credit card. You can use the free versions, just start to explore it a little bit. And then as you're getting inundated with marketing about AI, and you're going to be able to sort of sort through, oh, this is just marketing. Oh, this is actually creative and interesting. I want to hear about this type of thing. And so that would be my recommendation to a lot of people. And we're right at a good time to be doing that.
I think we're right at the right point in time to which experimenting with these things is essential. And Heath, I appreciate the additional use cases that you dropped into the chat here. I would lump some of these into some of those existing use cases, but I just copied this so I don't lose it at the end of the discussion, at the end of the webinar, so that I can go through these in detail. And Heath, of course, you're going to be getting an invite to participate in one of these discussions as well. I've already got one planned out that I thought would be really great for us to have together on the podcast. So we'll be moving our way down that path here over the next couple of weeks as we prepare for 2025. The deck will be available. Also will be a recording of the session as well. Will go up onto YouTube on Friday. I hope that you will share this with some of your colleagues. I hope that everybody enjoyed this discussion and that this added some value, to the overall discussions around artificial intelligence in the debt collection space. So for anybody that wants to reach out, if you want to have a chat with Chris or I, you can hit us up on LinkedIn or drop us an email. We're always happy to continue to have these discussions. Chris, I just cannot thank you enough for empowering and enabling me to go out and have some of these conversations and to do it in such a selfless way. You guys don't sell this product, you just want to participate in the discussion, and I really respect that and appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, my pleasure, and we're thrilled to help go on this journey, and really want to also learn at the same time. We want to provide things that our customers and prospects are interested in using. Absolutely.
Well, and for those of you that are on here that do sell artificial intelligence technology, I'll be interested to have some discussions with you once we lay a foundation about the discussions. And then I really do want to dig into the individual use cases and start kind of breaking apart some of the questions that organizations are going to have, and even maybe start asking some of the questions that we know are going to come up from a compliance standpoint as organizations start to explore your technology. But thank you, everybody, for the time and attention today. We really do appreciate all of you coming on to listen to our ramblings. I wish we had gotten through more of the slide deck. I feel like there's so much more to unpack, but we've got a lot of time and energy to really do this with you guys going forward. And, and Paul, I'm sure we can work out getting you one of the water bottles as well. We do appreciate you guys. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. We'll see you all again soon.